For the latest in strategic affairs, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon for updates.
Hello and welcome. You're on Strat News Global. I'm Nitin Gokhale. Today on Books Corner, we are going to feature an author who's quite well known in India and Pakistan and of course across the subcontinent and the world. Someone who specializes in looking into dark secrets of jihadi complexes and also the agencies that counter those dark secrets and the conspiracies and the operations of the jihadi elements across the world. On Books Corner today is the guest is Adrian Levy, although he co-authors the books with Kathy Scott Clark. But Adrian is the one who's going to speak to us and is going to tell us about his latest book, which has an interesting insight into how Pakistan and India's spy agencies work. The book is called Spy Stories Inside the Secret World of RNAW and ISI. RNAW, of course, is the Research and Analysis Wing, and ISI, of course, better known in India than perhaps the RNAW is. So on Books Corner, my guest today is Adrian Levy. Adrian Levy joining me from London. Welcome to this program and congratulations on your latest book.
Thanks very much for having me. It's always a pleasure to be with you and to have a conversation with you, and hopefully this will be the first of many to come.
Oh, of course. In fact, we've had conversations off camera a number of times, but this is perhaps the first one that we're doing in recent years, certainly. So first of all, the book itself is very intriguing, the very premise of the book. What gave you an idea and why did you think of doing this book, particularly because it must have been one of the toughest projects that you undertook, perhaps?
Absolutely. There were two main reasons. The first was a creative reason. And I think I told you this when we were together in Delhi, that I'd seen a while back an extraordinary film called Gatekeepers. And I really advise all your viewers, if you've not had a chance, find and download and watch, stream, etc. Gatekeepers. It's a feature documentary by an Israeli filmmaker and journalist called Dror Mareh. And it, for the first time, managed to get on screen the heads of Shin Bet, the internal security agency for Israel, who, in overlapping stories that covered much of the Israeli-Palestine conflict, began to tell something of the secret war that had gone on. It defined what the agency was, but also it defined something about the region, and in ways that you never hear before. These are stories that were shocking, revelatory, that were filled with paranoia, insight, good humor. And I was watching this and thinking, first of all, it's an excellent film, but the area in which there is undoubtedly the most cutthroat competition and also the most bloody and potentially significant exchanges is in fact one not covered anywhere, and that is between the ISI and the RAW. Pakistan and India, it is a competition that should intrigue and interest the entire world. What happens in the region matters to all of us, particularly now with the withdrawal of US forces from Afghanistan, the clues of which were sown right at the beginning when we looked at this kind of project. But I have to say from the off that spies are very shy, and there were not many of them who wanted to be on camera in any way. And we kept the idea on the back burner. We kept going back to them and selling them different versions of the same story and saying to ISI and to people in the RAW, look at the influence you can have by putting a film out there. Look how you can create your own narrative. There is no better example of that than what the CIA does. The CIA has a Hollywood liaison. The CIA cultivates the image of the CIA through, adventure series like The Bourne Identity or it changes the narrative away from accusations of torture by sponsoring films like Zero Dark 30.
Zero Dark 30. Yeah, exactly.
And you know, if the
or even Black Hawk Down, I think they sort of
Totally.
converted the defeat into a victory.
Exactly
Really.
right. And you know, a really bad thing that happens in the region, I think, is that success and defeat are not memorialized enough. And the instinct, I think, in the region is to move on. And you know, whether that be a catastrophe or an enormous victory, the victories are kept secret. In fact, they're kept more secret, and the catastrophes are somberly and secretly poured over, and then agencies move on. And the result of that is there is not that temptation to do what Americans do, or even for the public what Brits do. I mean, one quick example, apart from Black Hawk Down, which of course is a way of turning a defeat into a commemoration and a gripping film. You know, like 7/7 happened, the attack on the transport system in the UK. And I've said this before numerous times. There's more than 100,000 pages of evidence, testimony, eyewitness accounts that are just down the road in the National Archives in Kew. And Nitin and I can walk in there and we can access that and get a real sense of what was lost and what was won. Both factors are captured. And so I wanted to try and persuade people who prefer the secret and the shadows to come forward a little bit and explain the nature of the competition and also where they excel and where they fail.
And I like the way you've done it. It must have been very tough. So let me first ask you how tough it was to persuade some of these operatives who, by instinct, never want to come in front of the camera or come into the limelight at all. So how tough was that?
Super tough. It was really, really hard. I mean, the lucky thing is that we've been at this almost 30 years now, and that when we began, we were children who didn't know Hizbul Mujahideen from Hezbollah. And, you know, we could turn up and be totally blindsided by everything that was going on all around us. And yet the people who we were talking to were also extremely junior. But over the decades, as we gained a little bit more knowledge and met more people, the people we were with also grew in seniority. And so there was a kind of trust, a bond that grew up over the years. And I think, you know, we've been very careful to maintain that trust. And to try and be as open and straightforward, because it's important that you yourself are not perceived of as a spy, that you yourself, you know, are perceived of as a journalist, researcher, you know, the conduit for information for sure. But, you know, what we do is over. I think when Kathy and I first began, we thought we had to hide in the shadows and, you know, we'd be using the dark web and we'd use heavy encryption. And now we do everything in the total open. And if there's anything that we wish to conceal from anyone, even each other, the only way we do that is write it on paper. Because the only thing that's sure not to be read is what's written with graphite on paper. But otherwise, we do not wear professional clothing, and we carry our ignorance proudly because we're with people who excel and who have deep knowledge. And, you know, sharing that knowledge, while difficult, is also thrilling.
I actually like that approach because I can identify with it, having done it, some of it myself, not on the scale that both of you do, but I certainly identify the trust factor that you mentioned. Yeah. But, you know, I also find very interesting the very idea of picking or cherry picking, like you have said, 5 or 6 incidents between India and violent incidents between India and Pakistan. And then looking at them retrospectively from the eyes of the people who may have been involved on both sides. How was that experience? I mean, was it surreal? Was it sort of revelatory? What was the outcome?
Yeah, absolutely revelatory. I mean, you know, I've lived through these episodes as you have, Nitin, and it takes persuading yourself to sit down and work out the chronology again, to realise that the first thing that's really stunning is it's the same small family of bad actors. We're talking about a very small, hardcore bunch in the leadership of, you know, Islamism or political insurgency or nationalism. And, you know, we can name them. There's the cleric Masood Azhar, who'd go on to form Jaish, who was in an Indian jail and was freed in the hijacking of IC-814 in 1999. There is Omar Sheikh, a British Pakistani dual heritage, who was involved in kidnapping in Delhi in '94, and then became the subject of other kidnappings in '95, and then was released in the hijacking of 1999. And then, you have other people, Amjad Faruqi. Amjad Faruqi was involved in the kidnapping in 1995 to release Omar Sheikh, Masood Azhar, the cleric from Jaish, and then was involved in the hijacking to release both of those two in 1999. And then Ilyas Kashmiri sits at the top of the pyramid as a hardened fighter, thinker, field general for jihad. And a few people satelliting around Ilyas Kashmiri, who we know who work in other organizations like Lashkar-e-Toiba, led by Hafiz Saeed in Pakistan, and of course other elements of Jaish-e-Mohammed. So the same bad actors, a very small group who potentially wreaked havoc across the region for decades, leading to the loss of considerable number of lives. But the final part of the symmetry is it's the same hunters, the guys looking, and women looking to catch the bad actors are the same people. And so these seminal events are tracked on from a junior stage in the career to a 33-decade stage in a career by the same IB operatives, Intelligence Bureau, Domestic Intelligence in India, and the same RAW analysts and clandestine operators working in external intelligence, and as Nitin and I know, the same people in Border Security Force, the same people in Defense Intelligence Agency, the same people in Technical Intelligence, the same special forces and commandos. And so what you have is a core of expertise, people who are steeped in the encyclopedia of insurgency and jihad, and a core of bad actors who have their own laboratory that is refining methods of insurgency and terror. And these two forces are pitted against each other across 3 decades of battle.
Oh, indeed. In fact, I think the more you dig, the more familiar those faces would have become, and you would have got the same kind of trail and same kind of operations or modus operandi. But what I also find very interesting going through the book, Adrian, is the Gavrilov project, or the name that you give to Gavrilov. So explain to our viewers what do you mean by Gavrilov project, and why do you think this happened? Because obviously you got access on both sides. I will come to whether you got more access on Pakistani side or Indian side a little later. But what is the Gavrilov project that you were referring to?
Well, actually, it was raised initially to me by 2 officers in RAW who spoke of having read and studied a phenomena that took place in the dying days of the Soviet Union, which would also be the dying days of its external intelligence, the feared KGB. There was a suspicion and a building paranoia in American intelligence circles that if everything became rivalry and there was no method of reaching out, all stories gathered by each side on the other would be effectively whispers and rumors and conflated through eavesdropping, through interrogations and counterintelligence, which means no certain truths would be known. And so what the CIA did was the CIA set up a phone link, which literally went from Langley in Virginia to the Lubyanka, where KGB were based, and they named it after a Russian poet, Gavrilov. And if something really needed to be said, this literal phone line, I mean, this is the days before high levels of encryption and, to civilians like us, signal and wire. But, it was a back channel which allowed, it was a pressure valve, an escape route, a back channel that allowed information exchanges. And I do believe that the officers involved in that, the American in particular, a veteran CIA officer called Milt Bearden, wrote that without that, there would have been no cooperation on terrorism post the collapse of the Soviet Union, no cooperation on Islamism, on the global drug trade, on human trafficking, the trafficking of isotopes, etc. And so actually, even between 2 avowed enemies, and now there's no love lost between Putin and Biden, there are assuredly back channels which exist. And so there was a sense in which, because we told everyone we were traveling openly, sometimes going across the border at Wagah in the Punjab, on both sides of the Punjab, we could go from Alpara to Lodi Road, and we could say, we carry the greetings of X, and someone else would send back reciprocal greetings, or at least we would exchange information. And so there was a sense in which, although, of course, as you and I know, there are plenty of back channels, some of which last, some of which don't, and there are handshakes done digitally between organizations. There was an open historical exchange over key events where one agency would push forward and another would push back. And, and then later conversations would take place on WhatsApp until WhatsApp began to feel unsafe and we all abandoned it for other means of communication.
Go to Wire or Telegram or
Exactly
Signal.
right, yeah.
So, that's interesting. In fact, I think that shows how there's always hunger for more information about each other, which perhaps you would have fulfilled in some ways, at least to some extent, about the agencies looking for information of the other rival agency. But I also found very intriguing the approach that you've taken about taking two protagonists from each of these agencies, Monisha and Iftikhar. Why was that approach? And I mean, obviously, when readers read it, they will know, and I don't want to reveal what it means. But they're obviously real people. I mean, they've just assumed those names, I guess.
That's right. They're assumed names. One of them is an operation field name. There are many kinds of Iftikhars, and there are many Abduls, and there are many nom de guerres which come up during field work with the ISI. But the reason we came to both of those two is an interesting one, which is that many people in the institutions, or who had recently retired from the institutions but were still adjacent to the institutions of the RAW and the ISI, did stress to us that we shouldn't just take the positions of people who were in the executive, who are the officers who reach, the top 3, 4, 5 tiers of service in both sides, and that we looked at the situation from the street corner, from the ground up, and that not everyone had the same cohesive view. And whereas you have a more politicized view from the very top, from these extraordinary officers who gain, the vantage points of running the agencies themselves, whether that be a General Ehsan al-Haq running the ISI, or whether that be a Rajinder Khanna who would run the RAW, by talking to the operators who are of lower rank, or analysts who may only be, let's say, the equivalent of colonels, or lower ranks, captains, you're seeing actually what life is like in the trenches for people who are fighting. And a very interesting thing comes to play there, which is the way that the forces in intelligence agencies are buffeted by what they see. And they're affected by it. Their nationalism is affected. Their religion is affected. These are human beings, however disciplined they are. And real events that take place over several decades shape who they are and transform how they think. And that was the idea of getting these two real figures. And without giving anything away, Iftikhar may begin with ISI, for example, as a patriot loyal to his service. But that's not where he ends up at the end of his story. And Monisha has a similar sea change, although more subtle. And both would still regard themselves as patriots, but they don't end up in their organizations.
So, Adrian, a couple of last questions on this. One, of course, how easy or difficult it was in India to get access? Was it more difficult in Pakistan, or it was the other way around?
Well, the first thing I think generally to say is that it's exceptionally difficult, full stop, because you're dealing in contentious issues which are well protected, and for good reason, good operational reasons sometimes. And so therefore, all of that gentle persuasion and need has to come to light, and trust. And also political administrations change more frequently in Pakistan. And so therefore, in Pakistan, there were other tensions. There's a fear in Pakistan that talking publicly does not service the nation state. And, therefore, the agendas are much more buried and are much more concealed. And so, there was an element of difficulty, I'd say, and much more difficulty in Pakistan. And there's also the economy of scale. In India, the organizations are vast. And so opinions are broad, and covering the territory to hear those opinions was difficult. Ultimately, the groups of people who decided to talk were were generous, were revealing, and everyone is cautious and has two things in mind. One, satisfying their own curiosity and building up on their own encyclopedias of jihad and warfare and spycraft. But second of all, trying to gather and influence the narrative for the future. You know, what messages will come out, and in what ways can we help educate you about what you're seeing and the context that you're seeing in. And just one final thought for viewers is that really this is a privilege, because it's like being permanently in a doctoral class with people who've spent their lives, you know, gathering the evidence to be the lecturer who can lead that tutorial. And, you know, anyone who's had that career service, most of the people we're talking about can be quite often 36, 37 years of service. You know, they've missed every kind of family function, every wedding and every bar mitzvah has been missed in order to serve. And you know, and the result of that is that the knowledge they have is extraordinary. So there is never a time when that's not interesting. And there's never a time when you learn to keep quiet and to let them speak and you listen.
Well, I do envy you for the kind of privileged access you got. I wish I had that kind of access. But finally, when you conclude the book, I found it little pessimistic in the sense of the way the two sides have behaved, and there's likely to be no breakthrough. At least that's what I discerned from your conclusion. Are you really pessimistic, or things have changed since you finalized the manuscript?
You know, in life, generally speaking, I'm an optimist, because I believe in any amount of political transformation, and I believe it can happen surprisingly and in ways that we don't anticipate. But I am not naive, and I believe that there are many obstacles that are in the way right now. And some of those obstacles involve wider gamesmanship that's going on. You know, the rise of China, the problem of Iran and its relationship with the US, the exit strategy from Afghanistan have raised huge problems, not insurmountable, but huge problems in terms of future instability. And also the spy wars have sublimated into cyber warfare, into AI, into digital and technical intelligence. And as we all know, that represents a challenge for us, a challenge for the truth. And some of the most knotty battles now are going to take place over truth, truthfulness, and understanding, you know, what are facts and what is surmise. And the more politics becomes involved in that, the harder it will be to disentangle the truth.
True. So thank you very much for your time, Adrian, and I must thank you for very generous words that you have for me in the book. It's a disclaimer to our viewers that I'm not doing this interview because Adrian has been very generous in his praise and the kind of association that we have had. But it's a book that anyone interested in the world of terrorism, the secret world of spying and espionage, must read. That's something that I heartily recommend, and in fact, it's a strong urging that I have for reading the book again and again, because it has got so many details. It's not easy to absorb them so quickly. The speed reading that I've done. So I will go back to the book again and read it leisurely and digest it, the amount of information that it has. Congratulations once again, Adrian, and thank you for your time.
Thanks so much, and I hope to see you soon.
Yes, it is. Thank you.